Hello, I'm Allegra Pescatore. I'm an Own Voices Disabled author, and my books are Where Shadows Lie, an epic fantasy, and NaCl, Eye of the Storm, an arcane punk pirate heist.
When sitting down to visualize your world, what are the first things you tend to see most clearly?
When I'm first envisioning a world, I start with an aesthetic. Sometimes it's just a single word, rivers. Sometimes it's just a little glimpse, the voiceover of someone reading the news in a very, 20s style, or it's a simple question: what would happen if a world existed without salt? These very little, just core building blocks that shape everything after that. And from there, I try to build the world kind of like a mind map. Everything that I build has to somehow connect with that core aesthetic center that very much becomes the heart. My goal in world building is that people can read it and start making if this, then that assumptions about it and have them prove correct. So I know I've gotten it right when that happens.
How do you like to introduce the elements of your world? In a narration, explaining everything right up front, through unspoken action sprinkled throughout, through dialogue with your characters speaking to one another, or monologues where your characters break the fourth wall and address your audience directly or talk to themselves, or a combo of these things, or something else entirely?
For me, world building should be interspersed in every single detail of your novel, in how the characters talk and what they talk about and what they're eating and what they're wearing, in the buildings they pass and the dilemmas facing them. I don't really think about introducing the world. I more try to really understand the world well enough that the characters could not exist in any other space or time. When I've done that, it's never really a conscious decision when I'm sitting down to write where, okay, now I'm doing world building. I sometimes do, chunks of mythology if someone is hearing a story for the first time, but most of all, it's in those little details sprinkled throughout. Now, the exception here being magic. I do believe in the Sanderson 3 laws, especially that you can't solve a problem with magic that the reader doesn't thoroughly understand. So I generally try to have one character who doesn't understand how the magic works so that it can be explained to them through dialogue. I find that that is one of the most straightforward and easy ways to do that, but there are a lot of ways to do that as well, using little spells or methods early in the book that then will become important later in the book. But as far as the big building blocks of world building, I like to scatter them all over the place. And one day I'll write a comedy where they break the fourth wall and just dump it all out up front, because I actually love books like that. I totally get into those kind of asides. But I have not done so yet. So it's on my to-do list along with like 12,000 other genres that I haven't tried.
When it comes to world building, what element do you feel is the most superfluous more times than not?
I think the most superfluous element of world building is ancient history. There are definitely worlds and places where ancient history has a distinct and vivid influence on the story being told, but I think that writers as a whole, especially fantasy writers, tend to get a little bit caught up in world builder's disease, where you just expand and expand and expand and build, and you have so much in your iceberg that you forget that you're only supposed to show the tip. So I think that really successful world building is the world building that is immediately in sight of the characters. It's the things they're interacting with and that they care about and that shaped their lives. So that the superfluous stuff is actually sometimes in what I consider, a well world built novel, the stuff that doesn't make it onto the page to begin with. And I notice it when it's there, when there are details that just never come into play and aren't actually important to the story being told. So it's not one thing, it's more of an attitude about whether world building should exist outside of the story and the characters that are involved in it. And while it is perfectly valid to like that, like those, like, reading D&D manuals, I'm totally down for this. But I don't like it in my fantasy books. I want my world building to be on point and contained to relevant.
Where do you find most artists go wrong when it comes to world building?
I think the biggest stumbling block that most writers and other artists really encounter with world building is the notion that you can just cherry pick something from the real world and put it into a fantasy world without having to fundamentally alter its core components. That you can stick medieval England in, a completely different environment and a completely different time and still end up with the culture of medieval England. Or there's a huge problem with cultural appropriation in fantasy, where authors don't even realize that they are borrowing from living cultures who are much deeper and more connected, than the author is portraying. They're just portraying the stylization of a culture without truly grasping it, which is why I believe that own voices stories are so important. They really allow a deep dive into a culture that might not be as prevalent in fantasy, or might often be used as just kind of aesthetic flourish. I know this happens a lot with Eastern-inspired fantasy, and I'm always thrilled to see someone from those cultures write Eastern-inspired fantasies, because they're usually beautiful and deep and wonderful. Not to say that an author can't do their research and can't do a really good job. I've read plenty of books that way, and I really commend authors who take the time and get the sensitivity readers and do all the right things to write really authentic pieces, even outside their own cultures. But I do feel that that is the biggest stumble, especially with new authors, is just taking something, pulling it out of context, and expecting all the pieces to fit neatly together. They usually don't.
In thinking about your world expanding, is your approach to add in things you've already created outside of the story you were telling, or creating something from scratch, brand new, to add into and build upon the world that already exists?
I'm 100% a expand, don't add writer. I think that it's so much fun to take something really small and seemingly insignificant and just build it out and out and out and out until it becomes this plot that's living and breathing all on its own. So when I want to expand my world building, say in a sequel or a spin-off, that's where I start. I start with the questions that I've been burning to answer, but I haven't because they weren't relevant to the story, and I don't want to spend, 10 years world building this tangent that was never go anywhere. And being able to do that is so much fun. I enjoy it immensely. But I also do catch myself making brand new topics. My books all exist in a multiverse, and I set it up specifically so that each world in the multiverse was not only a very different world, but also a very different genre. We have arcane punk pirates next to epic fantasy, and they interact with each other. We're going to be introducing a fairy world with soft magic, and we've found ways to make it work with our hard magic systems elsewhere. There's gonna be just so many different genres, from hard sci-fi to, magical realism in these interconnected worlds. So that's where I do kind of just start from scratch, but I do really try to stick to my rules. Everything has to connect, and there are a few core fundamentals that I never break. And I think that internal consistency and logic are necessary to build reader trust. Without trust, the reader won't keep reading when you throw a curveball. And to build that, and for a reader to say, no, wait, they wouldn't put this in if it didn't matter, is to me the perfect relationship between a reader and an author, and what I absolutely strive to accomplish with every single book and every new expansion of my world building. You can find my books on Amazon, although sometime in December I am going to be going wide, so I will be available on pretty much every platform. You can find me at authorallegra.com or aocollectivepublishing.com. AO Collective Publishing is my publishing house, and it is a collective of authors. So we are always looking for new authors to join the fun and work in our little multiverse. You can also find me on YouTube as Plot Mom. We discuss writing, indie news, books that are coming out, author interviews, creative interviews outside of authors. We do a little bit of everything, and we have a ton of fun. There's a Discord server related to Plot Mom where we are very welcoming community, a lot of disabled authors, just very, very open and friendly and low-key. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as Author Allegra. Author Allegra will find me pretty much everywhere. I love to interact with people. I love to write with people. I love to coach people through their writing hurdles. It's kind of my joy. So find me, find my books. Where Shadows Lie tells the story of a disabled heroine who is the little sister of the Chosen One and has to take on his role after he dies. There is a dead Chosen One, so it's a lot of fun. And NACL Eye of the Storm tells a story of a world where the only source of salt is controlled by a big bad corporation, and a small group of intrepid pirates try to take him down. So it's a high-octane, non-stop pirate adventure, and I hope you find them, read them, enjoy, and come find my little community.